replica of which, a reproduction of which is on display in the RAF Museum Midlands here. Because, yes, there were many important fighting monoplanes in the First World War, the Fokker E-3 Eindecker perhaps being the most famous, but there was a degree of official mistrust in Britain towards the monoplane configuration, which perhaps held us back a little in terms of aircraft development.
So now if you look in front, you can see taking off is the P-47 Thunderbolt. We are moving into one of our very special sequences, I think, that we have lined up for you this afternoon. It was, in fact, and here's the Mustang as well. From our commentary position, we're quite a long way back, so we don't have the best view of what's actually on the runway at any one time. But if you...
So the activities of these aeroplanes in the European theatre from the summer of 1942, when they embarked on their first bombing raids over Germany, right through until VE Day in May 1945. For the first time then, on the ground here at the RAF Cosford Airshow, and operating from this airfield, it's the Boeing B-17G Flying Fortress named Sally B. It was, in fact, the RAF's early experience, ideal escort fighters to become available to the 8th Air Force. Here, though, we see two of them. The Republic P-47D Thunderbolt and an Australian-built version of the North American P-51D Mustang forming up on the B-17.
Slice of history in the sky here. The whole concept of the Flying Fortress was this: it can protect itself. Didn't quite work out like that at the time. The air crew had to complete 25 missions before any chance of going home, and 16%, that 1 in 6, was lost on that one raid.
Speed on this thing. No, but it is, because when it goes past us, we're like, we're just walking, he will be sort of into the earth, and we're like walking, we're like,
into Europe, but the P-47 and the P-51 in particular that we've just seen with the B-17 changed all of that. Just imagine what it must have been like for the crews on board those.
just the cold. That's what they
The scale of things is also just phenomenal. I mean, we think there was a time during 1944 when 40s knew that and would single them out. So in addition to everything else going on, you've also got to fly very, very tight formation. Hundreds of aircraft in the sky at any one time.
And not just B-17s, the consolidated B-24 Liberators as well. The scale, 1,000 tons of bombs, and this, above all, is the aircraft that salutes the men who made that effort possible. Talking of effort, the effort involved in keeping this aircraft airworthy in private hands by Ellie Sallingboe and her colleagues with B-17 Preservation at Duxford is also verging on the superhuman. This aircraft last year celebrated its 50th anniversary on the British display circuit in private hands. Ellie has been at the helm for the vast majority.
I showed my friend the B-24 bought at Midlands Airfest.
And as you mentioned earlier, just beyond belief.
Once again, that's the sort of heroism that will never be forgotten as long as this aircraft flies on. As I say, it does so in private hands. It doesn't receive official support. And a very big part of the effort behind this aeroplane comes courtesy of the contributions made by private individuals. The Sally B Supporters Club. And given that it's flying here at an RAF station and one of the homes of the RAF Museum, we ought to say that that disastrous early use of the fortress by the RAF wasn't based like the consolidation. Catalina arrived to literally plug that gap. And no fewer than 11 U-boats were sunk by RAF fortresses during the Second World War. We see the bomb doors on the B-17 open on this pass, and also smoke on to simulate a damaged engine, and this final pass always pays tribute to the members of the Sally B Supporters Club. You can join that organisation at sallyb.org.
Second World War.
This is often described as a very friendly aircraft to fly for such a large tail-dragging, tail-wheel-equipped machine. And of course, part of that, as one of its modern-day pilots reminded me, was because this had to be an airplane capable of being flown by men as young as that, as fresh out of training as they were.
If you're gearing an aircraft for the top 10%, then it's not going to do very well in service. And again, I'd just like to mention the colour scheme, how well that's working here. Later in the war, the B-17s were largely left unpainted, sort of bare metal. But for a while Sally B was taxiing from our position with the grass and trees, the aircraft almost disappeared.
So the aircraft now on its final approach to land. And there it is, down on Cosford's runway. Thanks so much to Ellie Sallingboe, the operator, for making possible this unique spectacle at this year's show, and to the flight crew.
Yes. Peter
Kuipers, the captain, Pete Kinsey, the co-pilot, both outstanding pilots on the historic aircraft scene, and operating the B-17 from this relatively short... A game changer, really, wasn't it, in terms of its performance and its legs?
It's got boobies on it.
It certainly is right up there as one of the best fighter designs of all time, no doubt about it. Was certainly a handful at low level. It was, of course, when the airframe met the Merlin, the Packard Merlin, the licence-built version, that the aircraft really delivered on its potential.
Yeah, and Britain was instrumental right from the start of this aircraft's life, of course, because it was designed to meet a British fighter engine that powered the early marks, the early models, was not particularly good at high altitude. Its outright performance was not as good.
Another button.
You're quite right to say that those Allison-engined examples
And perhaps the biggest part of the success story of the Mustang is its wing, which is known as a laminar flow wing. Now, even though we're at the Centre for Engineering Excellence for the Royal Air Force, I won't bore anybody with a lecture on aerodynamics, that's for another day, but the laminar flow wing has certain properties mainly to do with keeping drag as little as possible, and drag is quite fast without using too much fuel. And then when you put drop tanks and everything on, you get an aircraft that can escort bombers deep into Germany and back to the UK, and that, as you mentioned, was the game changer.
Air Force and the South African Air Force, but here we see the other of the two escort fighters that joined the B-17 earlier, running back in the P-47D Thunderbolt. Sweetly. It has beautiful handling characteristics, and one very, very seasoned warbird pilot I spoke to once said if he were putting a newly fledged pilot onto any high-performance warbird, he says this would be the one he'd go for first. And it's interesting, you know, talking about those attributes. In the escort role, the priority task is to protect the bombers, not necessarily to shoot the enemy down. Nice if you can, of course, but it's... The P-47 was also the most numerous American fighter of World